Most people believe society collapses suddenly. A war, a crisis, a breaking headline. But the truth is quieter. It begins in the structure, in the psychology of those who rise to the top. Catherine Austin Fitts describes a pattern that repeats across civilizations. A small percentage of individuals who lack empathy, who do not feel what others feel, who do not hesitate where others would stop, slowly climb into positions of influence. Not because they are wise, but because they are efficient. Because they are unburdened by the emotional weight that slows ordinary people down. Around them forms a second layer, competent, loyal, well-paid enablers. People who don't share the psychology of the leaders they serve, but benefit enough from the system to keep it running smoothly. They stabilize the machinery. They translate cold decisions into polished language. They make the structure look normal. And beneath them, the majority. People who feel the consequences but cannot see the architecture. They sense something is wrong in food, in healthcare, in finances, in the pace of life itself. But the pattern is too complex, too hidden, too overwhelming to name. This isn't a story about villains. It's a story about systems. How they drift when empathy is no longer a requirement for leadership. How confusion becomes a tool. How stress becomes a method of control. And how clarity begins only when you recognize that the world is not chaotic. It is structured. But once you see the structure, another question rises from the shadows. Who writes history? And who gets to be remembered as a monster or a hero? Imagine two leaders. One becomes the universal symbol of evil, his crimes taught in every classroom, his image synonymous with destruction. Another presides over policies that lead to mass suffering, yet her portrait is printed on coins, her legacy wrapped in elegance and ceremony. The contrast isn't about morality, it's about narrative power. During the Great Famine in India, millions starved while grain exports continued. Some called it economic theory, others called it negligence. Historians like Mike Davis called it something far darker. But the world didn't build museums for those victims. It built statues for the empire that oversaw them. So the question isn't just who committed the greater crime, it's who controlled the story afterward. History is not a mirror. It is a lens. And someone chooses the angle. Someone decides what to illuminate and what to leave in shadow. Someone determines which tragedies become universal symbols and which are reduced to footnotes. And once you understand that, another pattern emerges, one that hides behind every major conflict. We're told wars begin because nations clash, leaders disagree, ideologies collide. But when you follow the money, the picture changes. Banks, corporations, industrial giants, their fingerprints appear on every side of the battlefield. Financing flows across borders, long after diplomacy collapses. Weapons, supplies, loans, reconstruction contracts. The business of war does not care about flags. Nations fight on the battlefield, but the financing moves in the shadows, serving agendas that have nothing to do with patriotism. So maybe the real question isn't who won, but who needed it to happen. Who positioned themselves to profit before the first shot was fired. Because the deeper you look, the more you realize that war is not just fought on land. It is engineered in boardrooms, negotiated in back channels, and justified through narratives crafted for public consumption. And that brings us to the final thread, a reminder that history rarely begins where textbooks say it does. World War II is taught as starting in 1939, but the tensions that shaped it stretch back through revolutions, economic crises, ideological battles, boycotts, and global shifts that textbooks summarize in a single paragraph. Some events are highlighted, others are omitted, not because they are unimportant, but because they complicate the story, because they challenge the simplicity that official narratives depend on. History is not a complete map. It is a guided tour. Someone chooses the route. Someone decides which rooms you enter and which doors remain locked. Someone determines what becomes fact and what becomes context. Understanding the past requires more than memorizing dates. It requires questioning the silences, the missing chapters, the contradictions, the events that don't fit neatly into the official narrative. Because once you start listening to what history doesn't say, you begin to hear the truth beneath it, a truth shaped by power, edited by perspective, and carried forward by those who benefit from the version that survives. In the end, the world is not shaped only by what happened, but by what was remembered, what was forgotten, and what was never allowed to be told. You be the judge. If you're awake, then the message is already clear. Support the movement. Show where you stand. Some choices echo long after the moment has passed.